The rumble grew until it wasn't a sound anymore but a pressure that pushed against skin and bone. It rolled over the lake, through the snow, through the thin fire's weak warmth, and the dead on the shoreline shifted like a single organism tasting the air. Jon's breath came in harsh bursts. He kept his eyes on the ridge where the Night King stood, unmoving, and tried not to look down at the cracks that widened beneath them. The ice had begun to speak in sharp, brittle noises, little pops that sounded like bones snapping in the cold. Dark lines stretched toward their island as if the lake itself were trying to open. The chained Wight slammed its shoulder into the iron links again. Again, each impact a silent scream. Its mouth snapped inches from a man's wrist. His teeth clicked like stones. "Hold it!" Jon rasped, and no one answered because everyone was already holding everything. Chains, blades, breath, courage. The Wights at the shore did not rush. They swayed, arms lifted, fingers twitching, faces slack with hunger. Their blue eyes were the only bright thing in the storm. They looked like lanterns held by the dead. Tormund crouched low, beard ice-stiff, staring at the shoreline with the expression of a man watching wolves circle a wounded elk. "They're waiting for the ice to break," he growled. "They're waiting for him," Jon said. The Night King's presence pressed at the edge of Jon's mind like winter itself leaning in. Jon could feel him looking, cold attention that didn't blink. The Night King wasn't rushing because he didn't have to. Time was on his side. He had endless bodies, endless patience, endless cold. Yora shifted beside Jon, breathing hard, blood crusted on his cheek. His eyes kept flicking to the sky, desperate, searching. "The raven," he said, voice tight. "If it reaches. If it doesn't," Tormund muttered. "We die here and the dead get a new toy." Jon's fingers tightened around the dragonglass dagger until his knuckles ached. He thought of dragonstone, black stone and warm cracks, and the way the dragons had watched him like a question. He thought of Daenerys' face when Rhaegal had leaned in, when Drogon had measured him. Fear disguised as fury. "Come north," he had said. "See it." Now the storm itself seemed to roar that truth into the world. Ghost stood over Jon like a living wall, hackles raised, lips curled back. The direwolf's growl was low and constant, a promise of teeth against anything that crossed the ice. He was afraid. Jon could feel it in the tremor of Ghost's body, but he stayed anyway. That was what pack meant. The rumble returned, louder, closer, and for a heartbeat Jon's blood flared hot in answer. It shocked him every time, heat rising against all this cold. A coal trying to burn in a blizzard. The Wights on the shore turned their heads in unison toward the sky. Jon followed their gaze. At first there was only cloud and falling snow, gray on white, endless. Then the storm seemed to split and Haddo passed overhead so large it made the world feel small. Wings, not one set, several. The air shuddered as the sound of them hit the lake like a fist. The fire's flame bent sideways, nearly dying. Snow whipped harder. Tormund's eyes widened, and even he couldn't find a joke. "That's..." he began, then stopped, because there were no words big enough. Yora's breath caught. His face went raw with relief and terror all at once. Jon swallowed, throat scars pulling tight, and felt his heart slam against his ribs as if it wanted to climb out and fly toward that sound. Because he knew it now, not as rumor, not as story, but as truth moving through air. Dragons were coming. The first blast of fire hit the shoreline like dawn arriving in the wrong place. Drogon dropped through the cloud with brutal certainty, black wings beating snow into spirals. Daenerys clung to his neck, low and steady, her silver hair whipping like a banner in the wind. The moment Drogon opened his jaws, the world lit. Flame poured out in a long, roaring stream that swept across the packed Wights. The dead did not scream. Their bodies simply ignited. Ragged coats turning to torchlight, frozen flesh blackening, limbs collapsing as if cut. The smell of burning rot slammed into the air, thick and sickening. But behind it was something cleaner. Heat, raw and alive, pushing back the cold. Rhaegal followed, green bronze scales catching flashes of orange as he banked low. Viserion came next, pale gold against storm gray, wings cutting the air like knives. The dead recoiled, not with fear but with instinct. They pressed back from the flame, then surged forward again as it passed, because hunger didn't die easily. But the line broke. The ring around the lake loosened. The shore became a field of burning bodies that collapsed into black slush. On the ice island, men raised arms to shield their faces from sudden heat. The small fire at their feet seemed pathetic now, a candle beside a furnace. Jon staggered, not from the heat but from the way his blood responded. The moment the dragon's wings beat above him, that coal under his ribs flared hard, like his body recognized the rhythm. He tasted ash that wasn't from the burning Wights. He tasted something like storm and metal. Ghost barked once, sharp and frantic, then snarled at the sky as if he wanted to bite the wings themselves out of fear and fury. Daenerys circled once, scanning the ice. Her gaze locked onto Jon, and for a heartbeat the distance between them vanished, replaced by a hard, undeniable line of connection. Her coming here, risking her dragons, because his warning had finally become visible. Drogon dropped toward the island, snow whipping up around his claws as he landed with bone-jarring force. The ice beneath him groaned, but held. Heat rolled off him in waves, turning nearby snow into steam. Daenerys slid down from his saddle with quick, practiced movement, boots hitting ice. She didn't waste time on words. She looked at the chained Wight thrashing and flung her gaze to Jon, eyes blazing. "This," she said, voice tight with rage and vindication, "is what you meant." Jon nodded once, throat too tight for anything else. "Get on," Daenerys snapped to the men, jerking her chin toward Drogon. "Now." The group surged, scrambling toward the dragon. Tormund swore as he slid on ice. One man nearly fell under Drogon's tail, then yanked himself away. Drogon's head lowered, eyes narrowed, as if judging whether these small creatures were worth carrying. "Careful," Jon barked, grabbing a man's arm and hauling him up. "Don't touch his wings." They moved like ants around a mountain, clinging to straps, grabbing spikes, hauling the captive Wight by chain toward the edge of the island. Daenerys' gaze snapped to the shore. The Night King still stood on the ridge, watching through the storm. The fire had lit him in flashes. Dark silhouette, blue eyes like frozen stars. Daenerys' expression tightened. She pointed. "That's him." Jon followed her line, and cold slid down his spine. "Yes," Jon said. A flicker of something sharp crossed Daenerys' face. Not fear of the dead themselves. She had dragons, but fear of what those blue eyes meant. Something that didn't flinch, didn't run, didn't burn. "Move!" Daenerys shouted again, voice cracking like a whip. Rhaegal and Viserion strafed the shoreline, flame washing over clusters of Wights, buying time. The dead fell in heaps, but the sea of them seemed endless, shadows pushing forward behind the burning front. The ice beneath the island cracked louder. Jon grabbed the chain hooked to the captive Wight and yanked. The Wight thrashed, teeth snapping, trying to reach him. Jon's dragonglass dagger flashed, cutting its cheek, but the creature didn't bleed. It only strained harder, angered. "Up!" Jon yelled. "Get it up!" Two men hauled, grunting, dragging the Wight toward Drogon. The dragon's lip curled slightly, displeased. Daenerys' eyes cut to Jon. "You," she snapped. "Get on." Jon froze for half a heartbeat. He looked at the men scrambling, at the Wight's chain, at the ice cracking, at Ghost bristling and snarling. He looked at the ridge where the Night King watched, patient as death. And Jon knew, if they all got on at once, someone would fall. If someone fell, the dead would take them. If the dead took them, they would rise. Jon shoved a man forward. "Go," Jon barked. "Now." Daenerys' eyes narrowed. "Jon." "I'll be last," he said, and he didn't wait for permission. Because if he had learned anything in all his wars, it was this: survival wasn't clean. Someone always paid first. The dead found the courage to cross again the moment the fire shifted. They poured onto the ice in a rush, bodies colliding, slipping, crawling forward with mindless determination. The lake groaned under their weight. Cracks spread faster now, black lines racing toward Drogon like veins filling with poison. Faster! Jon shouted, slashing at the first Wight that reached the island's edge. Dragonglass punched through its skull, and it shattered into brittle pieces that skittered across ice. Another Wight lunged at him. Jon ducked, felt dead fingers brush his cloak, then drove steel into its chest. Collapsed, and 3 more surged over it like wolves over a carcass. Ghosts sprang, teeth flashing, ripping into a Wight's arm and tearing it free with a savage jerk. The limb spun away across the ice, fingers still twitching. Ghost snarled and launched again, a white fury defending his pack. Drogon shifted, claws scraping. His wings flexed, impatient, as if he disliked standing still while death crawled toward him. Daenerys kept a hand on his side, murmuring something Jon couldn't hear. Calm, command, comfort. Men climbed, hauled, clung. The captive Wight was dragged forward, chains clinking, its body jerking violently as it sensed living heat near Drogon. It snapped at a man's boot and nearly took his ankle. The man screamed and kicked, slipping, and Jon grabbed him by the collar and shoved him upward. Hold! Jon barked. Hold on! Tormund was half up Drogon's side, laughing like a madman even as fear flashed in his eyes. This is a better death than freezing, he roared. Shut up and climb! Jon shouted back. The ice cracked under Jon's boots, a sound so sharp it made his stomach drop. He looked down and saw a fracture line widening, water dark beneath, moving. Another wave of Wights surged onto the ice, and with them came a cold so intense it felt like knives in the lungs. Jon's breath caught. His scars pulled tight. He glanced up. Rhaegal hovered low above them, wings beating snow into a whirling storm. The dragon's eyes were fixed not on the Wights but on Jon. The attention hit Jon like a physical force. Pressure behind the eyes, heat under the ribs flaring as if answering a silent call. Jon's grip tightened on his dagger. Daenerys saw the way Rhaegal hovered, the way he held close, and her face tightened. Anger and fear and something like betrayal. Rhaegal, she shouted. Higher! Rhaegal did not climb. Instead, the dragon dipped lower, and Jon felt a surge of sensation. Wind, hunger, height. Like his mind brushed against the dragon's for the briefest instant. It made him stagger, just slightly, and a Wight almost took his throat. Jon recovered, slashing, shattering the Wight into chunks that slid across ice. Jon! Davos's voice screamed from Drogon's back. Get up here! Jon looked toward Drogon, toward the men clinging to leather and scale, toward Daenerys' fierce face framed by whipping hair. He could jump, he could grab a strap, he could haul himself up, but a Wight had grabbed one of the men below, dragging him down toward the ice, teeth snapping at his face. Jon moved without thinking. He lunged, seized the man's wrist, and yanked. The Wight's dead grip held. Jon slammed his dagger down into the Wight's forearm. The limb shattered, and the man fell backward, gasping. Jon shoved him toward Drogon. Go! The man scrambled, sobbing. The lake groaned again. Daenerys' voice cut through the chaos. Enough! Jon now! Jon turned, and saw the Night King on the ridge lift his arm again. Not at the lake, at the sky. Jon's blood iced over. He knew what was coming before it happened, like the moment before a sword strike when your body recognizes death's shape. Up! Jon screamed, though no one understood why. Rhaegal's wings beat harder, and snow exploded upward. Viserion banked in the storm. Drogon lifted his head, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. Daenerys followed his gaze. And in that heartbeat of stillness, Jon felt it. Heat in his blood answering the dragon's movement, flaring so bright it hurt. Then the world broke into motion again, and Jon threw himself toward Drogon's flank, hands reaching for the straps. Just as the Night King's arm snapped forward, The moment stretched thin as a drawn bowstring. Jon's fingers caught leather. Not Drogon's, not the straps Davos had shouted about, but something else. A harness line hanging from Rhaegal's low-hovering body as if the dragon had lowered it deliberately. Jon didn't think. He jumped. For an instant he was weightless above cracking ice, above snapping teeth, above the black water waiting. Ghost barked once. A sharp sound of panic and fury. And Jon saw him leap too, not onto a dragon, but onto a jagged ridge of ice closer to the group, claws scrabbling, desperate to stay near. Jon slammed into Rhaegal's side, grabbed the harness with both hands, and hauled himself upward as the dragon's muscles shifted. Heat rolled off Rhaegal, a living furnace under scales. Jon's face pressed against warm hide that smelled of smoke and salt. Rhaegal surged. Wings snapped open, and the air hammered downward with a force that nearly tore Jon's arms from their sockets. Snow exploded upward. The lake groaned like a dying thing. Jon clung, teeth clenched, eyes squeezed shut as the world dropped away. Then he felt it. Not just the wind, not just the lift. A pulse massive, ancient, beating through the dragon's body and into his own hands. It traveled up his arms, into his chest, and met that coal under his ribs as if they were made for each other. Jon's eyes snapped open. The lake was below now, shrinking. Wights swarmed across it, many slipping as cracks widened. Drogon lifted too, men clinging like barnacles, the captive Wight dangling in chains, thrashing uselessly in open air. Daenerys sat tight on Drogon's back, her face turned toward Jon with shock and raw fury. "Jon!" she shouted, the wind trying to steal the name. Jon didn't answer. He couldn't, because his mind was full of sky. Rhaegal climbed, and with the climb came a dizzying rush of sensation. The pleasure of height, the cold slice of wind over wings, the instinct to bank and dive and own the air. It hit Jon like a wave. He gripped tighter, breathing hard, trying not to be swallowed. Rhaegal's neck arched slightly, steadying him, and Jon felt the movement as if it were his own spine bending. He realized, with a terror that tasted like awe, that the dragon was adjusting for him. Rhaegal was carrying him, choosing to carry him like it meant something. Daenerys' gaze stayed locked on him, her expression cracking between anger and disbelief. Drogon roared, the sound rolling through the storm like a warning, and Jon felt it in his blood like a second heartbeat. Below, Ghost skidded on the ice ridge, looking up, frantic. Jon's chest tightened. For a wild moment he thought Ghost would be left there, alone on breaking ice. Then Tormund, mad, fearless, lunged from Drogon's side, grabbed Ghost by the scruff, and hauled him upward onto a strap line. Ghost snarled and fought, then froze as the ground vanished beneath him, his body trembling with terror. Jon's throat tightened with relief that hurt. The dragons climbed through cloud. Wind tore at Jon's cloak, trying to rip it away. His hands burned, his scars pulled with every gasp. But the heat inside him steadied. Not frantic now, but connected, like a rope tied around his ribs. And for the first time, Jon didn't feel like he was only hanging on. He felt briefly, impossibly, like he belonged up here. The storm thinned as they climbed, but the cold did not ease. Up here the wind was cleaner, sharper, cutting through breath and thought. Cloud tore past like shredded cloth. Snow became needles. Jon's fingers went numb around the harness. His arms shook. Rhaegal's scales were warm under his palms, and the contrast between that heat and the air's bite made him feel unreal, like he was clinging to a living furnace in a world made of ice. He forced himself to look. Below, the frozen lake was a white scar. Wights swarmed at its edges like black insects. In its center, the ice island cracked and collapsed, the little fire extinguished, swallowed by snow and distance. The Night King remained on the ridge. Even from this height, Jon could see him clearly when lightning flashed. Dark armor, pale face, blue eyes like frozen flame. He stood with the calm certainty of a god who didn't need to chase prey. Daenerys turned in her saddle, looking back over Drogon's shoulder. Her face was white with shock, her mouth open as if she had no words big enough. Because Jon was not on Drogon. Jon was on Rhaegal. Jon saw the moment her gaze landed on him. Rage flaring, fear rising, confusion clawing behind it. Her grip tightened on Drogon's reins like she could hold her world together with leather. Rhaegal banked slightly, and Jon's stomach lurched. Then the sensation shifted into something smoother. His body adapting, his breath finding rhythm like Rhaegal's motion was teaching him how to stay. It would have been breathtaking if he wasn't choking on wind. Viserion flew lower, pale gold aflicker beneath cloud. Men clung to Drogon's harness lines. The captive Wight swung and thrashed, its chains stretched taut in the air. Then Jon saw the Night King move. Slow, deliberate. He bent, and from the snow he drew up a long spear of ice, impossibly solid, glittering with blue light. He held it like it weighed nothing. Jon's blood turned to ice. "No!" he tried to shout, but the wind tore the sound away. Daenerys saw it too. She jerked Drogon's head, trying to climb, trying to gain distance. Drogon roared and beat his wings harder. But Viserion was lower. The Night King's arm drew back. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to the line of that spear and the pale dragon in its path. Jon felt heat surge under his ribs, violent, panicked, like his blood wanted to leap out and grab the sky. He gripped Rhaegal's harness so hard his hands screamed. The Night King threw. The spear shot upward with unnatural speed, cutting through snow and cloud like a blade through flesh. It left a streak of freezing blue light in its wake. Viserion turned his head at the last instant, as if he sensed it. His wings beat, trying to climb. Too late. The spear struck with a crack that Jon felt in his teeth. It punched into Viserion's neck, driving deep, ice erupting around the wound like sudden crystal. Viserion's roar ripped through the sky, pain and fury and shock, so loud it owned the storm. Viserion's wings stuttered. He faltered, losing rhythm. Daenerys screamed something Jon couldn't hear. Drogon roared, a sound of rage that shook cloud. Rhaegal surged forward instinctively, and Jon felt the movement as if he'd willed it, like the dragon wanted to reach his fallen kin. Viserion's body rolled. For a heartbeat he fought, wings beating, claws reaching for air. Then the strength went out of him like a cord cut. Viserion fell. He dropped through cloud, pale scales vanishing into gray, his roar fading into a distant, sickening silence. Jon's breath caught. His throat scars burned. He stared down, helpless. Daenerys twisted in her saddle, face torn apart by grief and fury, her hand reaching back into empty air as if she could grab the falling dragon and pull him up by will alone. "Viserion!" she screamed, and even without hearing the sound, Jon could see it in the shape of her mouth. Below, the frozen lake waited. And Jon knew, before the fall finished, that the Night King hadn't thrown that spear to win a battle. He'd thrown it to take something. The impact was not seen so much as felt. A tremor ran up through the air, a dull shock that made the dragons above flinch. Jon leaned forward, straining to see through the cloud break, and caught a glimpse of white ice erupting, water turning black and violent as something enormous smashed through it. Viserion disappeared beneath the lake. For a heartbeat, there was only churned water and shattered ice, a dark wound opening in the white. Daenerys froze in her saddle like someone struck. Her face was utterly still, all expression burned away, and then the grief hit, sharp and ugly and uncontainable. Her mouth opened in a scream that the wind tore apart, but Jon saw it anyway, saw the way her whole body shook. Drogon roared, furious, and his wings beat harder, circling above the broken lake like a predator searching for a kill it could not bite. Rhaegal banked, trying to descend. Jon felt the dragon's agitation like a storm inside his own bones. Rage, pain, confusion. The sensation nearly knocked Jon from his grip. Jon reached out instinctively, one hand lifting into the cold air, as if he could grab Viserion through distance. His fingers spread, trembling. He felt nothing but wind. Below, the whites moved. They swarmed to the hole in the ice, bodies piling at its edge, blue eyes flaring. They didn't hesitate at the water. They didn't fear drowning. They waded in, sinking, vanishing into black, arms stretching down like roots seeking something buried. Jon's stomach turned. "No," he rasped, though the sound was stolen. Daenerys saw it. Her head snapped down, eyes widening as the dead began to work with purpose. Not random hunger now, coordination, obedience. "They're taking him," Jon shouted, but the wind shredded the words. Daenerys' eyes fixed on the lake, and Jon saw something in her face harden. Not cruelty, not pride, but a brutal, forced acceptance that grief could not stop what was happening. Her jaw clenched until it looked like it might break. Drogon circled lower. Rhaegal tried to follow. Jon's grip tightened as the dragon dipped, and Jon felt that odd connection flare. His own fear feeding into Rhaegal's agitation. Rhaegal's anger feeding into his blood. Heat surged under his ribs in a frantic pulse. Then the Wight's hands emerged from the black water. Chains, iron links dragged up from somewhere beneath, hauled by dead arms that did not tire. The chains looped into the hole, sank again, and for a moment the lake looked like it was being stitched open. Jon's breath came harsh. Daenerys leaned forward in her saddle, eyes wild, and Jon saw the decision in her posture. Burn them, burn the lake, burn everything if it meant stopping them. But she didn't. She hesitated, because burning the dead in the water might not burn what they were pulling up, because fire might not reach deep enough, because if she scorched the lake, she might only help the Night King by clearing ice, because she did not know, and that hesitation everything. The chains tightened. Something shifted beneath the surface, an enormous shape rolling in the black. Jon's heart hammered so hard it hurt. Then a pale wing broke the surface for a heartbeat, slick with water, and disappeared again, dragged down, repositioned, hauled. Daenerys made a sound that was more animal than human. Her hand clenched hard into Drogon's harness, knuckles white. Jon stared down, frozen, unable to look away. He felt Rhaegal's anguish as a pressure behind his eyes, and for a moment he thought he would black out from it. Then the Wights began to pull, really pull. Their bodies braced on ice, their arms straining in perfect, silent unity. The lake's black wound widened. Something enormous rose. Not alive, not yet, just being hauled into the world by hands that did not belong in it. Jon's chest tightened until he could barely breathe. He knew what was coming before it fully surfaced. And he knew the Night King was smiling, even if Jon could not see his mouth. Eastwatch was chaos made of cold. They came in like a storm, dragons beating the air above the black water, men clinging and half-frozen, breath ripping from lungs. The Night's Watch shouted as the shadows passed overhead, voices cracking with awe and fear. Some men dropped to their knees at the sight of wings. Others raised spears by instinct, then realized how useless spears were against sky. Drogon landed first, claws biting wood, his heat turning the dock's frost into steam. Men slid off him, falling to their knees, coughing. The captive Wight swung in chains, snarling silently, and when its feet hit planks it thrashed like a hooked fish. Rhaegal landed a heartbeat later. Jon slid down awkwardly, legs shaking, not from fear, but from the way his body still wanted to be in the air. His hands were stiff from gripping leather. His breath came hard. He almost fell as his boots hit the dock, and Davos grabbed his arm, holding him upright with rough, desperate strength. "Easy," Davos rasped. "Easy." Jon's gaze snapped immediately to Daenerys. She stood a few paces away, rigid as a spear, her face carved into stone. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not with tears she allowed but with tears she'd crushed. Her shoulders were tight, as if grief had become a weight she refused to drop. Drogon hovered behind her like a living shadow, head lowered slightly, eyes burning gold. He watched everyone with the patience of a creature deciding whether to kill. Rhaegal's presence pressed at Jon's back, warm and restless. Ghost leapt down and shook snow from his fur, then pressed close to Jon's leg as if making sure Jon was still in the world. His ears were pinned back. His eyes kept flicking up toward the dragons, unsettled by the smell of them, the heat of them, the wrongness of them. The Night's Watchman stared at Jon with a new kind of disbelief. He had left as a man. He returned having ridden a dragon, whether he admitted it or not. Tormund stumbled off Drogon, laughing once, short, cracked, then doubled over, coughing. "That was a damned poor idea," he wheezed. Jon's mouth twisted. "You enjoyed it," Jon said. Tormund spat blood into snow. "I survived it," he corrected. The Wight snapped and lunged, chains clanking, nearly catching a watchman's sleeve. The man recoiled with a shout, face pale. "Keep it away!" someone yelled. Jon stepped forward, grabbed the chains, and yanked the Wight back with brutal force. The creature hissed soundlessly, thrashing, its blue eyes burning. It strained toward living heat with endless hunger. "This is your proof," Jon said, voice hoarse, and he looked at Daenerys when he said it. Daenerys's gaze flicked to the Wight, then away, as if looking too long might invite it into her nightmares. Her jaw clenched hard. "I saw," she said, voice flat. "I saw enough." Jon's chest tightened. "Then you go north," he said. Daenerys's eyes snapped to him, sharp as a blade. "Don't," she warned, and the word meant don't press, don't. Demand, don't make grief become anger. Jon swallowed. His throat scars pulled tight. "Viserion is gone," Jon said quietly. Daenerys flinched like she'd been struck. Her eyes went bright with fury. "Say his name again," she hissed. "And I will." She stopped, because she did not know what threat would satisfy this pain. Davos stepped between them slightly, hands raised. "Please," he said, voice rough. "Not here." Jon held Daenerys's gaze, and for a heartbeat he saw it. Her grief sitting like a wound under all her fire. She had lost a child in the cold, and cold did not care about queens. Daenerys drew a slow breath and forced herself to speak like a ruler again. "We take this thing," she said, nodding sharply at the captive Wight. "We bring it south. It shows the truth." Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped. "And then we plan." Jon's jaw clenched. "The Night King saw your dragons," he said. "He wanted that." Daenerys's face went still, and for the first time her fear had no disguise. "He will not have them," she said. Jon's voice was low. "He already has one," he said, and the words tasted like ash. Daenerys's hand tightened on Drogon's harness until her knuckles went white. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Above them, the wall rose silent and immense, and far away, beyond its ice, something was being dragged up from black water by dead hands. Dragonstone welcomed them back with black stone and bitter silence. The castle felt different now, not simply ancient and sharp, but wounded. The corridors echoed with hurried footsteps. Unsullied moved with tighter discipline. Dothraki voices were quieter. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. In the map hall, torches burned too bright, as if fire could erase what had happened. Daenerys stood over the painted table, staring at the carved north like she could burn the distance away with her eyes. Tyrion stood at her side, face grim, humor stripped away. Varys watched from shadow, calm as ever, but his eyes moved like a man counting knives. Jon stood opposite Daenerys, still smelling of snow and death. His hands ached, his throat scars burned. He kept thinking he could still feel Rhaegal's motion in his bones, like the sky had left a mark on him. "We have proof," Tyrion said carefully, voice controlled. "A captive Wight can be shown to." Daenerys's head snapped toward him. "I don't care about showing," she cut in. "I care about stopping." She stabbed a finger at the map, at the wall's thin line. "He has a dragon." Silence fell. Varys's voice slipped in, soft. "If the creature can raise dragons," Varys said, "then the wall is no longer what it was." Jon's jaw clenched. "It will fall," he said. Daenerys's eyes flashed. "Not if I'm there," she said, and the certainty in her voice was not arrogance now but desperation turned into steel. Tyrion swallowed. Daenerys, he said. Going north means everything, she snapped. Yes, I know. Her hand tightened on the table's edge. Viserion died because I hesitated. I will not hesitate again. Jon felt a cold twist in his gut. Then come, he said. Daenerys's gaze cut to him. For a heartbeat, the old tension returned. The question of kneeling, the question of thrones, the question of dragons watching him like a second rider. But Daenerys's grief changed the shape of those questions. She didn't have space for court games now. She had a wound that needed blood to answer it. I will go, she said, voice low and final. I will fight the dead. Her eyes hardened. And when the dead are broken, we will return to the living war. Jon's mouth tightened. If there's a living war left, he said. Daenerys's chin lifted. There will be, she said, because I will make it so. Tyrion looked at Jon, and Jon saw the unspoken warning there. This alliance was born of necessity, not trust. Could crack the moment the dead were beaten back. Varys's gaze lingered on Jon, thoughtful and dangerous. You rode Rhaegal, Varys said quietly. The words cut through the hall like a drawn blade. Jon's chest flared with heat, involuntary. He forced it down. I held on, Jon said. Varys's smile was faint. Men don't usually hold on to dragons, Varys murmured. Daenerys's eyes narrowed, the old fear returning in a sharp flicker. We don't speak of that, she said, voice hard. Tyrion cleared his throat. We shall. Speak of what matters, Tyrion said quickly. The wall, the Night King, how fast he can move now that he has. Tyrion's mouth tightened. That weapon. Daenerys stared at the map, and when she spoke again, her voice was colder than the stone. We fly north, she said. We bring fire. We bring dragonglass. Her gaze lifted, fierce. And we kill him. Jon nodded once. We try, he said, and he could feel both women bristle at the honesty. Outside, a dragon roared, deep, impatient, and the stone of Dragonstone trembled. Jon's blood answered like a spark, and he knew the war room wasn't only planning for the dead. It was planning for what would happen if fire chose him again when everyone was watching. The world beyond the wall did not sleep. In the heart of the storm, the dead worked with tireless precision. Chains groaned, ice shattered. Black water churned around pale scales as the enormous body was dragged upward inch by inch. Viserion's head broke the surface first, jaw slack, eyes closed, water streaming from his horns. His wings followed, heavy and limp, torn at the edges by ice and chain. Wights clawed and hauled, slipping, rising again, their fingers locking on iron links that cut into dead flesh without consequence. The Night King stood at the edge of the hole, unmoving, watching his prize emerge like a treasure pulled from the sea. When Viserion's body lay half on ice, half in water, the Night King stepped forward. Silence fell across the dead. Not an absence of sound, but a unified stillness, as if every wight held its breath despite having no lungs. The Night King placed one hand on Viserion's neck. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then blue light flared under the dragon's wet scales, spreading like lightning trapped beneath skin. It crawled along veins, igniting them with cold fire. The ice around the hole cracked and refroze in an instant, white turning to glassy blue. The wights surged back, their bodies jerking as if in worship. Viserion's head twitched, a slow, unnatural movement, muscle remembering life because something forced it. The Night King's hand pressed deeper. Blue light flooded up the dragon's throat, into the jaw, into the skull. Viserion's eyes snapped open. They were no longer pale gold. They were burning blue. The dragon's body convulsed, water flying, wings shuddering as if trying to beat and forgetting how. A roar tore out of his throat, broken, hollow, wrong, echoing across the frozen waste like the world itself cracking. The Night King stood still, face unreadable, while the new monster screamed into the storm. Viserion's jaws opened, and blue light pulsed between teeth. Not flame yet, not fire, something colder, something that did not belong to dragons. The Night King turned his head toward the distant wall, toward the thin line of ice that had held back death for centuries. And the dead began to move. The wall stood tall, arrogant in its age. Ice rose like a cliff into the storm, white and endless, its face carved by wind into hard lines. Men on its top could not see far in the blizzard below. They could only feel the cold deepening, wrong cold, crawling cold, seeping through stone and bone. At its base, the dead gathered. They were a black sea against the white. Thousands, tens of thousands, bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, eyes burning blue in a darkness the storm could not hide. They did not speak. They did not tire. They waited, as patient as winter. The Night King stood before them, calm as a king at a feast. Above him, wings unfurled. Viserion rose into the blizzard, water still dripping from his scales, now stiffening into frost. His movements were heavier, wrong, like a puppet forced to dance. But the power in him was undeniable. His eyes burned blue enough to stain the storm. He lifted his head and opened his jaws. Frost steam poured out, thick, rolling, freezing the air as it touched. The cold intensified, biting so deep it felt like it wanted to split bone. Inside Viserion's throat, blue light gathered. Not warmth, not fire, a cold flame that made the very air shiver. The Night King did not lift a hand this time. He didn't need to. He simply watched, and the dragon obeyed. Viserion's chest swelled as if drawing breath for the first time since death. The blue light brightened, pulsing like a heart that beat only for winter. On the wall above, men leaned over the edge, squinting into the storm, sensing something enormous moving beneath them. They heard the roar then, broken and wrong, and it rolled up the ice like a promise. Viserion's jaws opened wider. Blue flame surged forward, the first tongue of it licking into the storm. And the wall, for the first time in its long existence, faced a weapon it was never built to withstand. The blue flame did not roar like normal fire. It screamed. It poured from Viserion's jaws in a steady, merciless stream, a cold blaze that made the air itself crack. The moment it touched the wall, the ice did not melt the way a hearth flame would have made it run. It shattered, exploding outward in white shards that flashed like broken glass, then refroze in places in a glaze of unnatural blue. Men on the wall leaned over the edge, faces rapt, eyes wide, and the heatless light painted their cheeks an icy color that didn't belong on living skin. Some shouted, some prayed, some simply stared, their minds refusing to accept what their eyes saw. A dragon breathing winter. The Night King did not lift a hand. He did not gesture. He did not need to. He stood below like an anchor in the storm, calm as a statue, while the wall, ancient, arrogant, eternal, began to make a sound no one had ever heard from it before. A groan, not wind, not ice creaking, a deep, grinding complaint, as if the wall itself had realized it was mortal. Viserion's blue flame cut a line along the base, carving into the ice like a blade sawing through bone. Frost steam rolled upward, thick and choking, freezing the air as it rose. The blizzard turned strange, snowflakes crystallizing midair, falling heavier, sharper. The men on top backed away, boots slipping on rimed wood. A horn sounded once, too thin, too late, then another, frantic, the call shattering into the wind. Down below, the whites pressed closer, their blue eyes glowing in the shifting light, hungry hands lifting as if reaching for the first cracks. The wall shuddered, and the blue flame did not stop. The collapse began as a single fracture, an ugly black line splitting the white. It raced upward with impossible speed, branching like lightning trapped in ice. For a heartbeat, the wall held anyway, sheer stubbornness and centuries of cold clinging together. Men ran along the top walkway, shouting warnings that were eaten by wind. Boards creaked. Support beams snapped with sharp, brittle pops. Then the wall gave. It didn't fall like a building. It broke like a glacier. A slab of ice the size of a castle tower sheared away and thundered down, smashing into the base with a sound that shook the blizzard. The impact threw up a cloud of ice dust so thick the world vanished into white. The shockwave rolled across the dead ranks, and still they did not flinch. More cracks followed, more groans. The wall shuddered again, once, twice. Then another section ripped free, collapsing inward, dragging chunks of the wooden walkway with it. Men screamed as timbers tilted and vanished, swallowed by white and blue light. The blue flame continued, relentless, carving deeper, widening the wound. The wall became a mountain turning to rubble, and the air filled with shards and splinters and the smell of cold so intense it made lungs burn. When the ice dust thinned, the gap was there, wide, brutal, undeniable. A broken mouth in the wall's face, teeth scattered across the ground, and through it the dead began to pour. They climbed over fallen ice, crawling like insects over a carcass, bodies snapping and bending in ways living men could not. Some were crushed beneath collapsing slabs, their limbs pinned, their torsos shattered. Then they kept moving anyway, dragging themselves forward with fingers that did not feel pain. Above, the remaining watchmen stared down at the gap, frozen not by cold but by the knowledge that their world had changed in a single breath of blue flame. The Night King finally moved. He stepped forward once, calm and certain, and his army followed him through the broken wall as if it had never existed. At Eastwatch, panic moved faster than any horn. Men stumbled through snow-choked alleys between wooden buildings, grabbing what they could: bows, axes, sacks of grain. Anything their hands found before fear made them clumsy. Torches shook in numb fingers, their flames bending low in the wind. The air was full of ice dust, the kind that coated eyelashes and turned breath into needles. A watchman ran past with blood on his face, screaming a warning that had no shape. Wildlings shoved children and old men toward the docks, snarling, cursing, moving like a pack under attack. The old gatehouse groaned as if it could feel the wall dying behind it. Tormund barreled through the chaos like a battering ram with a beard. He seized a terrified watchman by the collar and yanked him upright. "Move!" he roared. "If you're going to die, die running." The man sobbed and ran. Ghost flashed through the storm, a white shape leaping broken timbers, weaving between legs, darting back to snap at anyone who hesitated too long. His ears were pinned. His growl was constant. He smelled the dead in the wind now, strong, close, inevitable. Someone shouted that the docks were blocked. Someone shouted that the ships weren't ready. A cluster of men fought with frozen ropes, hands slipping, knots refusing to hold. Then the first Wights appeared at the edge of the settlement. They came through the blown snow like shadows stepping out of a nightmare. Blue eyes, jerking limbs, mouths open in silent hunger. A man screamed and loosed an arrow. It struck a dead chest and did nothing. Another man swung an axe. It hacked into a dead shoulder and stuck, and the Wight kept coming anyway. Tormund bellowed and slammed into the line, swinging his axe with wild fury, chopping dead bodies apart not to kill them but to slow them. "Dragonglass!" he roared, but there wasn't enough. Not here, not for this many. Men began to retreat in ragged waves, falling back toward the docks, toward the sea that had once felt like the edge of the world and now felt like the only escape. Behind them, somewhere in the storm-dark gap where the wall had stood, a roar rolled, broken and wrong, and the blizzard lit blue for a heartbeat. Viserion's voice, not alive, not theirs, and Eastwatch ran, because no wall remained to pretend bravery meant anything. A single raven took flight like a last prayer. A watchman, older, shaking, his beard frosted white, held the bird against his chest for one heartbeat longer than he should have, as if the warmth of feathers could give courage. His lips moved in a whisper that might have been a message to the gods, or to anyone who still listened. Then he threw the raven into the storm. The bird's wings caught wind, buckled, recovered, and then it was gone. Black against white, fighting for height with desperate fury. The watchman turned back to the settlement just in time to see a wave of whites spill through a broken alley, bodies tripping and rising, eyes bright as cold stars. He stumbled, nearly fell, then ran again because running was all the living had left. Men shoved off from the docks, oars biting black water. A ship lurched away with half its crew still on planks, hands reaching, screaming. Another boat capsized under too many bodies, and the sea swallowed their cries. The watchman didn't look back at the wall's gap. He couldn't. The blue glow pulsed there like a wound that would never close. He ran until his lungs felt like they were filling with knives. He ran because if the Raven reached Winterfell, if it reached anyone, then maybe the North would be ready to die properly. And somewhere above, hidden by storm, Viserion's broken roar echoed again, and the sound made every living spine tighten with the same thought. There is no going back now. The Raven arrived at Winterfell like it had flown through death itself. It burst into the hall, wings wild, snow clinging to its feathers, and landed hard on the table's edge amid parchment and carved markers. Its beak snapped once, sharp and angry, as if the bird blamed the world for what it had carried. Sansa stepped forward at once, hands steady despite the sudden silence that spread through the room. Lords and captains leaned in, faces tight. The air smelled of smoke and damp wool and fear held in teeth. Arya watched from near a pillar, still as a blade in a sheath. Bran sat by the fire, eyes distant, as if he'd been waiting for this message since before the Raven was born. Sansa untied the parchment with careful fingers and read. Her face changed in small steps. First concentration, then disbelief, then a hardening that looked like ice forming over water. When she looked up, the hall felt colder. "The wall is broken," she said. A murmur rose, then choked off as if the words had stolen breath from the room. Someone swore. Someone laughed once, short and hysterical, then stopped when no one joined. Arya's eyes narrowed. "How?" she asked. Sansa's voice was flat. "A dragon," she said. "A dead dragon." A silence followed that felt impossible to fill. Bran spoke then, voice calm as snowfall. "He has Viserion," he said, as if it were a simple fact like winter coming. Several men turned toward him, startled, angry, desperate for contradiction. None came. Sansa clenched the parchment in her fist. "Sound the horns," she ordered. "Send riders, every holdfast, every lord. Tell them the dead are through." Captain swallowed. "And if they don't come?" Sansa's eyes flashed. "Then they die alone," she said. "And we die together." She stabbed a finger at the maps. "We fortify. We move the dragonglass to the walls. We bring the people inside. We burn what we cannot hold." Arya stepped closer, voice low. "Jon." Sansa's jaw tightened. "He's with her," she said. Bran's gaze lifted slightly, unfocused. "He's in the sky," Bran murmured. "And the sky is changing." Sansa didn't ask what that meant. She didn't have time for riddles. She had time for orders. Outside, the first horn blew, deep and heavy, and Winterfell began to wake like a beast preparing for a fight it might not survive. The next Raven came to Dragonstone with salt on its wings and terror in its ink. Daenerys read the message once, then again, as if repetition could change the words. The torchlight caught the tightness in her jaw, the whiteness of her knuckles where she gripped the parchment. Tyrion stood beside her, face drawn, eyes darker than usual. Davos watched like a man staring at a wave he knew would drown him. Jon stood opposite, still smelling of snow and smoke and dragon heat, the sensation of flight not yet shaken from his bones. "The wall is gone," Daenerys said quietly. Her voice held no tremor now. "No hesitation." Only the cold steel of someone who had finally run out of excuses. Jon's throat scars tightened. "He's through," Jon said. A deep vibration rolled through the stone, and Drogon's distant roar answered as if the castle itself had flinched. Daenerys didn't look up. She didn't need to. The dragons had been restless since the lake. They felt her anger like a storm. "We fly," Daenerys said. Tyrion's mouth opened, then closed. He nodded once, grim. "Yes," he said. "We fly." Varys was not there. He would already be moving pieces, whispering to someone, preparing the realm for what would come after survival. Daenerys's gaze snapped to Jon. "You said winter commands," she said. Jon met her eyes. "It does," he replied. Daenerys's lips pressed thin. "Then winter will learn what fire costs," she said. "We go north. We bring the armies. We bring the dragons." Her voice dropped. "And we end him." Jon didn't offer comfort. Comfort was useless here. He offered truth. "He has a dragon now," Jon said. "He will try to kill yours." Daenerys's eyes hardened. "Let him try," she said. The brazier flame shivered as another roar rolled through the castle. Drogon's impatience, hungry and furious. Daenerys turned, cloak snapping, and began issuing commands like arrows. "Grey Worm, ready the Unsullied. Now, Missandei, send word to the fleets. Tyrion, you come with me. And you," she said to Jon, voice sharp, "you will be at my side." Jon's chest tightened, not with pride, not with fear, but with the weight of what standing at her side meant now. In the eyes of the realm, in the eyes of dragons, he nodded once. "Fine," he said. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Dragonstone, and the air tasted like lightning, because fire was finally moving north. They flew into the north like a storm that had learned to carry grief. Drogon led, black wings beating a hard rhythm. Daenerys sat low in the saddle, cloak snapping behind her like a banner of war. Her face was carved from determination, but Jon could see the wound in it whenever her gaze drifted to the empty space where Viserion should have been. Rhaegal flew beside and slightly behind, his green bronze scales dull under cloud light. Jon rode him not in a saddle. There wasn't time for that, not for explanations, but in harness and grip, body pressed close to warm scale, fingers locked into leather until they ached. The first minutes had been terror. The next had been adaptation. Now there was something else. An uneasy rhythm forming between Jon's breath and Rhaegal's movement, between the dragon's bank and Jon's shifting weight, like the air itself was teaching him. He felt Rhaegal's muscles tense when the wind changed. He felt the dragon's irritation when snow whipped too hard. He felt, briefly, dangerously, the dragon's satisfaction when they climbed above a cloud layer and the world opened beneath them. Every time that sensation brushed him, Jon forced himself back into his own body like a man forcing a door shut against fire. Below, ships moved like dark insects across the gray sea. Daenerys's fleet carrying Unsullied and supplies north, sails straining. The sight should have inspired hope. Instead it inspired urgency, because the dead did not need ships. Daenerys glanced back once, her eyes meeting Jon's across the gap of air. There was no softness in that look, only a hard agreement forged in frost and blue flame. Whatever they were to each other, the dead had made it irrelevant for now. Jon nodded once, and Rhaegal answered by beating his wings harder, closing the distance slightly as if the dragon disliked being apart. Drogon roared into the wind, a sound of anger and ownership, and for a heartbeat Jon felt his blood flare hot in response, an answering pulse that made his stomach knot. Daenerys saw Jon's reaction. Her jaw tightened. She turned forward again, refusing to look at the problem while the larger one waited ahead. The north rose beneath them, white land, dark forests, rivers frozen into dull veins. Smoke lines marked villages huddled against winter. The sky grew harsher. The wind sharpened. Jon saw Winterfell in the distance eventually, a dark shape against snow. Home. And the air above it was about to fill with dragons. Winterfell reacted the way living things always reacted to sudden shadows. Spears snapped up. Shields rose. Men shouted half orders, half prayers. Horses screamed and reared in the yard, eyes rolling white. The Stark banners snapped violently in the wind as if trying to rip free and flee. Sansa stepped into the courtyard with her cloak pulled tight, her face controlled into a mask that did not crack even when the sky darkened. Arya moved beside her like a blade at her hip, silent and ready. Bran sat near the firelit archway, calm and distant, as if dragons landing outside Winterfell was simply another turning page. Then Drogon swept overhead. The force of his wings hammered the yard, throwing snow into spirals. Men staggered, torches guttered. A roar rolled over the walls and into the stones of the castle itself, vibrating bone. Rhaegal followed, banking lower, and Jon felt the dragon's body shift beneath him with a terrifying ease. The sight of Winterfell from above stabbed at him. Familiar walls, familiar towers, smaller than he remembered, as if the air made everything fragile. They landed outside the main gate, where the ground was less cramped. Drogon hit first, claws gouging frozen earth, steam rising. Rhaegal came down next, wings spreading wide, sending a final gust of wind that made men stumble back. Jon slid down from the harness line, legs unsteady. The moment his boots hit the ground, Ghost tore out from the gate like a white streak, barreling toward him with a bark that was half accusation, half relief. Jon dropped to one knee instinctively, and Ghost slammed into him, pressing hard, tail low but shaking, whining like he was furious Jon had left it all. Jon buried his hand in Ghost's fur, breathing in cold and wolf and home. "I'm here," he murmured, voice rough. "I'm here." Daenerys dismounted Drogon with practiced grace and strode toward the gate. The North watched her like they watched fire, useful, dangerous, uncontrollable. Her eyes swept the walls, the men, the banners, taking in a land that had refused her. Sansa stepped forward onto the threshold, posture rigid. She did not bow. She did not smile. Daenerys stopped a few paces away, meeting Sansa's stare. "This is your home," Daenerys said, voice carrying. Sansa's voice was cold. "It is," she replied. "And those are your dragons." Daenerys's jaw tightened. "They're here to fight the dead." Arya's eyes flicked to Jon, then to Daenerys, measuring. "So are we," Arya said. Bran's voice drifted out, calm as snowfall. "Winter is here," he said, "and it brought wings." For a heartbeat, Jon felt Rhaegal behind him shift, the dragon's gaze turning toward the gate, toward the castle, toward the people. Jon felt the flicker of attention like a pressure at the back of his skull. Sansa saw Jon's proximity to the dragon, and something hardened in her eyes. Not surprise, but grim recognition, as if the raven had never carried the full truth, but she had guessed the shape of it. She looked at Jon, and her voice was low. "We need to talk," she said. Jon nodded once. Behind him, Drogon's breathing was a steady furnace. Rhaegal's wings folded slowly, the sound like heavy canvas settling. Winterfell had welcomed fire. Now it had to survive what fire brought with it. The war room was too small for the storm they'd brought into it. Maps covered the table, north, wall, river crossings, narrow roads that became death traps in winter. Chunks of dragonglass sat beside carved markers like black teeth. Torches burned along the walls, throwing heat that could not warm the tension. Sansa stood at one end, hands braced, eyes sharp. Daenerys stood opposite, spine straight, chin lifted. Tyrion hovered near Daenerys like a man trying to keep two blades from crossing too soon. Jon stood between them, feeling like the hinge on a door everyone wanted to slam. Arya leaned near a pillar, arms crossed, eyes never still. Bran watched from near the fire, calm and distant, as if all this was already written. "We fortify Winterfell," Sansa said, voice clipped. "We put the people behind stone. We stock food. We evacuate what we can't protect." Daenerys's eyes narrowed. "Stone won't stop them," she said. "Fire will." Sansa's mouth tightened. "Fire burns people too," she replied. Daenerys's voice sharpened. "Then move the people," she snapped, "because I won't apologize for using the only weapon that matters." Jon's throat scars tightened. "Enough," he said quietly, and both women turned to him like he'd thrown a rock into a frozen pond. "We need both," Jon continued. "Walls slow them, fire thins them, dragonglass kills what leads them." He looked at Daenerys. "You saw what he has." Then he looked at Sansa. "And you know what we lose if we're careless." Sansa's eyes stayed hard. "We lose everything," she said. Daenerys's jaw clenched. "Then we do not lose," she said, and the certainty in her voice was a weapon. Tyrion cleared his throat. "We should assume the wall's breach means they're coming faster than we planned," he said. "We should expect them at Winterfell." A murmur moved through the northern lords. Fear, anger, resignation. Bran spoke softly. "They are already moving," he said. "And he is not rushing because he doesn't need to." Jon felt his stomach knot. "He wants a fight here," Jon said. Daenerys' eyes narrowed. "Why?" Jon looked at her. "Because you're here," he said. "Because your dragons are here. Because the North's last stand will draw every living thing to one place." Daenerys' gaze flicked, briefly, to Jon, then away, as if she heard the second meaning in his words and didn't want to touch it yet. Sansa's voice cut in sharp. "And if your dragons decide they like my brother," she said to Daenerys, "what then?" Silence snapped tight. Jon felt heat flare under his ribs, involuntary. He forced it down, face still. Daenerys' eyes went cold. "My dragons do not decide my politics," she said. Arya's voice was low. "Dragons decide what they want," she said, as if that settled it. Tyrion's expression tightened. "We cannot afford this," he said quickly. "Not now. Not with the dead at the door." Jon looked at Sansa. "We're not fighting each other," he said. Sansa's eyes didn't soften. "We won't if you..." "Don't give me a reason," she replied. Jon held her gaze, and in it he saw the same fear as always. Fear of losing him. Fear of being left. Fear of being powerless again. Daenerys stepped closer to the table, voice controlled. "We set our lines," she said. "We choose our ground. We decide when the dragons strike." Her eyes lifted, fierce. "And we kill the Night King." Jon nodded once. "We try," he said, and he could feel both women bristle at the honesty. Outside, a dragon roared, deep, impatient, and the stone of Winterfell trembled. Jon's blood answered like a spark, and he knew the war room wasn't only planning for the dead. It was planning for what would happen if fire chose him again when everyone was watching. Night came early, and with it came the quiet kind of fear, the kind that didn't shout, didn't run, didn't bleed yet, but sat in the chest like a stone. Jon walked out beyond Winterfell's walls into an open field dusted with snow. Torches lined the edge, their flames bending in the wind. Men watched from a distance, pretending they weren't watching, hands tight on spears. Northern eyes and foreign eyes both followed him. Rhaegal stood in the field like a living fortress, his green bronze scales dull in the failing light, steam curling from his nostrils. He shifted his weight, claws scraping frozen earth, and the sound made the men nearby flinch. Ghost paced at Jon's heel, tense, ears pinned, but he didn't stop Jon. He simply stayed close, prepared to die if he had to. Drogon perched farther back near Daenerys, black and massive, watching the world like it belonged to him. Daenerys stood beside him, posture rigid, face controlled, eyes fixed on Jon with a tension she tried to mask as vigilance. Jon knew what this looked like. It looked like betrayal. It looked like prophecy. It looked like the beginning of a story that could get them all killed. But he also knew what it felt like. Rhaegal's pulse in his hands, the sky's pull in his bones. If he could not understand it, he could not control it. If he could not control it, the wrong moment would come and everything would break. Jon stopped a few paces from Rhaegal. He lifted his hand slowly, palm open, the way he had on Dragonstone, the way he had on the plateau. He forced his breathing steady. He forced his mind to stay inside his own skull. Rhaegal watched him. For a heartbeat, Jon felt the old pressure behind his eyes, the heavy attention that wasn't human. Heat flared under his ribs, bright and dangerous. He did not step forward. He waited. Rhaegal lowered his head slightly, just enough to change the air between them. A murmur ran through the watching soldiers. Fear, awe, the beginning of rumor. Daenerys' jaw tightened. Jon didn't look at her, but he felt her stare like a blade at his back. Ghost growled low, warning and pleading at once. Jon swallowed, throat scars pulling tight, and whispered, not to command, not to claim, only to steady himself. Easy, he breathed. Rhaegal exhaled, and warm steam rolled over Jon's hand without burning. The dragon's eyes narrowed, considering, and Jon felt that strange brush of connection like the edge of a wing passing close. Jon's hand hovered inches from scale. He did not touch, not yet, because the real test wasn't whether a dragon would accept him. The real test was whether he could hold the fire inside him without letting it decide the war's shape. Behind him, Winterfell's walls stood dark against snow, and far beyond them the dead were coming with a dragon of blue flame. Jon held still in the torchlight, hand open, and felt the whole north watching him like a question. And somewhere in the night sky, as if answering that question, a low rumble rolled from a dragon's chest, deep, patient, like the world reminding him that the air was never truly empty again.